This is the VOA Special English Education Report. We had a question from China, from a listener who wanted to know about John Dewey. John Dewey was an influential thinker and educator. The New York Times once called him America's philosopher. Larry Hickman is director of the Center for Dewey Studies at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. He was not surprised that the question came from China. Mr. Hickman told us he just returned from 2 weeks of meetings in Beijing in December. He and Chinese educators discussed the close relationship between Dewey's ideas and those of Confucius. He also worked with a group of Buddhists who like Dewey's work very much because it goes along with some of the ideas of Mahayana Buddhism. John Dewey described his ideas in books including Democracy and Education, The School and Society, and How We Think. Mr. Hickman said Dewey was perhaps the best-known philosopher, educator, and public intellectual of the 20th century. He was active in many fields, including education, philosophy, psychology, and humanistic and humanitarian affairs. He was an important influence in the founding of the American Association of University Professors and the American Civil Liberties Union. He was also influential in the founding of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, although he himself was white. John Dewey was born in Burlington, Vermont in 1859. He was influenced by the scientific work of Charles Darwin. He was also influenced by the work done with immigrant English learners in Chicago by Jane Addams. She was a social worker and the first American woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And Dewey was influenced by observing his own children. At the University of Chicago, he founded the Laboratory School. But Dewey would likely have disagreed with many current practices in American education, like the wide use of standardized testing. Larry Hickman said Dewey thought that testing had its place, but that testing should be more like medical tests. They should be testing for individual needs, interests, and abilities, and not to compare one student to another. John Dewey died in 1952. But Dewey scholar Larry Hickman says his ideas are still being taught in education schools. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. In 2009, Junior Achievement marked its 90th anniversary of educating young people about business and economics. The nonprofit organization is the largest of its kind. Jack Kozakowski is Executive Vice President. He says, "We are the oldest business and economic education organization in the world. We are now serving 9.2 million young people around the globe in 123 different countries." Programs begin in elementary school and continue through middle and high school. The education is based on the ideas of market-based economics and entrepreneurship. Junior achievement began in 1919 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Two business leaders, Horace Moses and Theodore Vail, joined with Senator Murray Crane of Massachusetts to start the group. For more than 50 years, junior achievement programs operated through clubs that met after school. But in 1975, JA also began to teach business skills during the school day. Volunteers from the community teach about businesses, how they are organized, and how products are made and sold. The volunteers also teach about the American and world economies and about industry and trade. The Junior Achievement Company program teaches young people how entrepreneurship works. They learn about business by operating their own companies. Students develop a product and sell shares in their company. They use the money to buy the materials they need to make their product, which they then sell. Finally, they return the profits to the people who bought shares in the company. Chelsea Cruz joined a student-operated company 2 years ago. The Higher Grounds Cafe in West Hills, California, sells high-quality coffee. She says her experience has given her valuable training that will help her for a lifetime. Junior Achievement says 385,000 volunteers support its programs around the world. In the United States alone, there are nearly 23,000 places that hold Junior Achievement events. Junior Achievement Incorporated and Junior Achievement International combined their operations in 2004. They formed Junior Achievement Worldwide. Its headquarters are in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Recent discoveries of mineral wealth in Kenya could help add to East Africa's biggest economy. The government also is taking steps to improve the openness of the mining industry. But some citizens are concerned that at least one newly announced mining project will damage local communities. The government has warned companies about making announcements about new resources before they are confirmed. Kenya's Secretary of Mining, Najib Balala, says the government will ask mining companies for details about their findings 21 days before making them public. The discoveries also could upset some communities where big mining projects are planned. One example is the recent discovery of rare minerals in the Marima Hills in the coastal area of Kwale. The mining company Cortec reported finding a deposit of more than 600 kilograms of niobium. The element is used in making steel and metal mixtures called superconducting alloys that allow electric currents to travel very easily. Cortec says the discovery could be worth $50 billion. but a dispute has begun between the company, the government, and the local community. Leaders of the Mijikenda ethnic group, which lives near Kenya's coast, say they practice their religion in the Marima Hills. The Kenyan government has not announced how payments it receives from mining companies, called royalties, would be used. The mining secretary is expected to present legislation proposing that the central government take 70% of mining royalties. Local governments would receive 25%, and local communities would receive 5%. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report in Special English. Recently, we told you how some medical schools in the United States offer future doctors a way to finish in 3 years instead of 4. Some law schools also offer a way to save a year. People who want to become lawyers traditionally attend 3 years of law school. Like medical students, many law students are deeply in debt by the time they finish their Juris Doctor or JD degree. Those who take out loans borrow an average of around $100,000. Almost all graduates must pass a state bar examination to get a license to practice law. New York University Law School professor Samuel Erstreicher thinks more students should be allowed to take the bar exam after 2 years of classes. This was more common in the past. Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo and President Franklin Roosevelt both took the bar exam after 2 years. Professor Erstreicher also suggests a more professional instead of a more academic program of study. Learning more about professional skills, he says, would better prepare a lawyer to serve the needs of average Americans. Some law schools offer a choice of a 2- or 3-year program. In 2009, Northwestern University School of Law in Chicago became the country's first top law school to add an accelerated program. Accelerated students at Northwestern have to learn the same material and pay the same price as 3-year students. Some lawyers argue against accelerated programs. They question whether many law firms would want to hire lawyers without that 3rd year of law school. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Outdoors in the open air seems like a natural place to study natural science. It also makes sense in a place like Southern California, where people like to be outside a lot. Now, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County has redesigned an outdoor space into a living exhibit. The 1.5 hectare area used to include a parking lot. Now it welcomes birds, butterflies, and many other living things. Teacher Eva Eng has visited the museum's outdoor campus with her students. She says they enjoyed the experience. The children were learning about plant science in school. Museum scientists come outside to describe plants and insects in the natural setting of this outdoor laboratory. Greg Pauly studies turtles. He tells students how urban development has changed the habitat of turtles like the western pond turtle. He says these animals are happiest around small bodies of water that grow and shrink with the seasons. Today, with development, there is much more permanent water, like the pond at the Natural History Museum itself. The scientist says the changing habitat is one reason why western pond turtles are disappearing. In addition to science lessons, the open-air exhibit provides contact with nature in a way that city children rarely get. Landscape architect Nia Lair says children can get real-life answers to questions they may have. Outdoor classrooms help students understand how the natural world is interconnected and how living things need habitat to survive. Museum official Karen Wise says the whole museum is opening up to an indoor-outdoor experience. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Professors have lectured for centuries. But how effective is lecturing to students compared to working with them? A new study compared 2 classes of a beginning physics course at the University of British Columbia in Canada. There were more than 260 students in each section. Both were taught by popular and experienced professors. The study took place for 1 week near the end of the year. One class continued to be taught in the traditional lecture style. The other professor was replaced by 2 teachers. They had little teaching experience, but received training in interactive teaching methods. The training was led by Carl Wyman, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who leads a science education program. There was almost no lecturing. The teachers put the students in small groups to discuss and answer questions. The instructors always gave feedback after the groups did tasks, and they gave readings and quizzes to finish before class so the students would come prepared to discuss the material. Professor Wyman says there was a great deal of data showing how identical these 2 large sections of the class were before the study. At the end of the experiment, both classes took the same test. Students in the interactive class scored nearly twice as high as those in the traditional class. Attendance also increased that week. Graduate student Ellen Chellew was one of the teachers. She says the methods they used are designed to encourage students to think like scientists. The study appeared in May in the journal Science. It seems to confirm earlier findings about lecturing to large classes. But some experts have criticized the way the study was done. Both of the researchers who taught the class, Ms. Chellew and Louis Delaurier, were also authors of the study. This could raise questions about whether their involvement might have influenced the results. Professor Wyman is currently on leave from the University of British Columbia and the University of Colorado. He is the Associate Director for Science in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He says research has shown better ways to teach based on evidence about how the brain learns. And he hopes more professors will learn that how someone teaches may be more important than who does the teaching. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can find a link to the physics test that the students took at voaspecialenglish.com. I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. The Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, is a 2-hour test that compares the performance of 15-year-olds. In the latest test, the countries with the best readers were South Korea and Finland. But students in Shanghai, China, scored the highest of all in reading, mathematics, and science. The next strongest results were in Hong Kong, Singapore, Canada, New Zealand, and Japan. In all, around 500,000 students in more than 70 economies took the test in 2009. The test has been given every 3 years since 2000. Shanghai took part for the first time in 2009. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development released the results. Andreas Schleicher is director of the Education Indicators and Analysis Division at the OECD. He says, Asian countries value education more than other countries. They have given education a priority. Every child, every teacher, every parent knows that education is the gateway to success. Mr. Schleicher says other education systems can learn from Shanghai. For example, he says education spending in the province has increased, including teacher pay and training. And administrators are putting teachers into challenging classroom situations to make them better at their jobs. In the PISA scoring system, Shanghai scored 600 in math. By comparison, the United States scored 487. Shanghai's reading average was 556. American 15-year-olds scored 500, the same as in Iceland and Poland. In science, Finland was second behind Shanghai. The United States was 23rd. Education Secretary Arne Duncan says the results show an urgent need for Americans to do more to remain competitive in the world economy. He points out that the United States has fallen from 1st to 9th place in college graduation rates because of gains by other countries. Mr. Schleicher says international testing experts have investigated and confirmed the Shanghai scores. He says the PISA results are not representative of all of China. But he also says they dispute the common belief that Chinese education is centered on repetition and memorization. 25% of the Shanghai students showed advanced thinking skills to solve difficult math problems. The OECD average was 3%. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Public schools in the United States have to be neutral about religion, even though they close for holidays like Christmas. The Constitution separates religion from government. Researcher Charles Haynes explains what it says. He says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those 16 words provide the framework for how we deal with religion in our public schools. Those words are part of the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of expression and other rights. Charles Haynes is a senior scholar at the First Amendment Center, a group that studies free expression issues. In the last generation or so, different groups have encouraged public schools to celebrate diversity and cultural differences. At the same time, courts have ruled against any publicly supported celebrations of one religion over another. Charles Haynes thinks the schools are generally doing a good job. He says, so public schools now, I think, understand that their role is to expose students to learning about different religions in a fair way, an objective way. Their role is to protect the religious liberty rights of students. If they want to express their faith, they may do so. But school officials under the First Amendment may not take sides in religion. Hollie Jones teaches 6-year-olds at a public school in Loudoun County, Virginia. Each December, she has her students make posters about their own celebrations at home and present them to the class. The posters are discussed and then shown on the walls at the school. Ms. Jones says, some students will do Hanukkah, some Kwanzaa, some Christmas. Some we've had in the past do the Chinese New Year. Some children come from families with more than one religion. Hollie Jones says the children always ask lots of questions about the traditions of other families. She says this gives them an understanding about how different and diverse the students are. And Charles Haynes says that is one of the purposes of public education in America. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report, written by Nancy Steinbach. You can find transcripts and podcasts of our reports, and you can post comments at voaspecialenglish.com. And you can find us on Twitter and YouTube at VOA Learning English.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. American librarians have announced their choices for Best Children's Books of 2014. One honored book is The Story of a Squirrel and an Imaginative Girl. Another is about trains. Deborah Taylor is a librarian at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland. She has served on several award committees. She says the committees look for good writing and good storytelling. The American Library Association's John Newberry Medal honors the writing of a book.
Its Randolph Caldecott Medal honors the illustration or pictures of a book. This year, the Newberry Medal went to Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures by Kate DiCamillo. It was her second work to win a Newberry. Flora and Ulysses is a humorous story about a squirrel and a girl who live in a world both real and unreal. The Caldecott Medal was awarded to Locomotive, a book by Brian Floca. It has been praised for its technical understanding and explanations of how things happen on a moving train. Librarians also give out other awards to books for children and young adults. For example, the Coretta Scott King Award goes to African American writers and illustrators for books about African American culture. This year's award went to Rita Williams Garcia for her book P.S. B11. The Robert F. Seibert Medal is for informational books. Parrots Over Puerto Rico by Susan Roth and Cindy Trumbore won the 2014 medal. Their book tells about how scientists and activists saved the local birds. Librarian Deborah Taylor says, the book shows Puerto Rico as it is not often seen. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carla Babb.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The United States, the European Union, and Japan have called for talks with China under the dispute settlement system of the World Trade Organization. They want to discuss China's export limits on rare earth metals and 2 other minerals. WTO rules give talks 60 days to work. If they do not settle the dispute, a WTO panel can then be requested to help reach a settlement. Rare earth metals are used in the manufacture of almost every high-technology device, from mobile phones and computers to batteries for electric cars, and demand is only growing. China says it follows WTO rules in exporting the minerals. In 2010, China mined about 130,000 metric tons of rare earth metals. That was about 97% of world production. But information from China's government and the United States Geological Survey shows that China has reduced its export limits sharply in the past 2 years. Critics say this unfairly helps Chinese companies in the production of high-technology products. And they say it is a violation of World Trade Organization rules. President Obama explained why the United States was involved in the case. He said American manufacturers use rare earth materials to make high-tech products like advanced batteries. We want our companies building those products right here in America, he said. To do that, they need access to materials that China supplies. In the president's words, if China would simply let the market work on its own, we'd have no objections. But he said Chinese policies go against the very rules that China agreed to follow. China says it has restricted rare earth exports to meet needs at home. And it says its policy helps limit the environmental damage caused by overmining. China now faces a slowing economy. In February, the nation had its biggest trade deficit in 10 years. Experts expect China's central bank to increase the money supply to aid economic growth. At the same time, inflation remains a threat. On March 14th, Premier Wen Jiabao discussed the need for reform. China, in his words, must continue to strike a balance between maintaining steady and robust This is the VOA Special English Education Report. More than 600 delegates recently met in Burkina Faso to discuss education in Africa. The aim is to find ways to support economic growth by improving education and job training programs. The delegates included education ministers and representatives of civil society, business, labor, and youth groups. The meeting, held every 3 years, is known as the Triennial. Alan Beal Kataria is Executive Secretary of the Association for the Development of Education in Africa. His group organized the week-long conference. He says there is a missing link between education and employment in Africa. For example, schools need to improve technical training for students who do not continue to secondary education. Mr. Beal Kataria says educational programs need to be reshaped to better fit the needs of employers. He says this is already happening in some countries, including Tunisia, where the association is based. For instance, where they have to train engineers, there is a lot of discussion between the schools and the companies in order to know the demands of the company, to take them into account in the curriculum and even in the management of the schools. In Mali, an association of artisans is working to improve the skills of mechanics, woodworkers, and tradesmen. That association has also helped workers and companies to win government contracts. Several West African countries are working together to develop a network of trade and vocational schools. The idea is based in part on a successful example developed by Nigeria. Mr. Beal Kataria says educators are working to connect government-run school systems with other groups that are helping educate students. These include non-governmental organizations, community literacy centers, and faith-based groups. Among these groups are Islamic schools, or madrasas, that are expanding what they teach. Another subject for the conference was peace education. The idea grew out of the violence in Kenya related to elections in 2007. The idea of peace education has since spread to countries including Rwanda, Somalia, Ivory Coast, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. New technology offers a way for Africans living elsewhere in the world, the African diaspora, to aid development in their home country. For example, a professor could use video conferencing to teach a class back home. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
I'm Mario Ritter with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Food prices are at their highest level since the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization began keeping records in 1990. The causes include bad weather and growing demand. Some experts also blame the use of food crops to make fuel. But higher food prices are not always the result of limited supplies. Coffee prices have jumped almost 50% in 6 months. Prices have reached a 13-year high. Yet growers expect their current crop to be almost 10% bigger than the last one. J.M. Smucker is an American company known for its jellies and fruit spreads. But Smucker also owns Folgers, America's top-selling packaged coffee. And it owns Dunkin' Donuts, which sells coffee to wash down the donuts at its stores. In February, Smucker said it would raise the prices of its coffee products by an average of 10%. It said the increase is driven by the higher prices for coffee beans. Experts say coffee prices are rising mainly because people are willing to pay more. Coffee sellers, like Mark Warmoth, say tastes are changing and more people want a good cup of coffee. Mark Warmoth owns the Emmy Swing Coffee Company in Alexandria, Virginia, near Washington. He says big coffee sellers like Starbucks help his business by building a base of customers who want something better. He said people are seeking something better than what they can get at Starbucks. They are seeking out smaller, boutique, artisan, craft coffee roasters, like his company. Yet Mr. Warmoth can thank those bigger companies, like Starbucks, for spreading the idea of coffee as an affordable luxury. The thinking goes that during hard times, people might not go on a trip, but they might be willing to pay extra for good coffee. The company supplies restaurants and other businesses, but also has a store in Washington near the White House. Customers pay $13 for less than half a kilogram of beans, about double the price of other brands. Greater demand for high-quality coffee has helped drive coffee prices higher. That includes greater demand among Brazilians. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of coffee. People in India are also drinking more coffee. Starbucks just announced plans to enter that market in a deal with India's Tata Coffee Company. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Concerns about a double-dip recession were back in the news at the end of June. Some economists warned of the possibility of another downturn if governments withdraw growth measures too quickly. But others warned of the dangers of letting deficits and debts continue to grow. Leaders of the world's biggest economies agreed to cut their deficits by half or more by 2013. They also promised to try to reduce the size of their government debt in relation to their economy by 2016. Western countries have not faced such high debt levels in 60 years. Leaders like President Obama, however, argue that the recession would have been much worse without the spending. At the close of the Group of 20 summit in Toronto, Canada, the president noted moves in Europe to cut government spending. He said, "A number of our European partners are making difficult decisions. But we must recognize that our fiscal health tomorrow will rest in no small measure on our ability to create jobs and growth today." In the United States, stocks have been falling since April on concerns about the recovery. At the end of June, a business research group reported a drop in consumer confidence after 3 months of gains. The conference board said more Americans believed business conditions were bad and that jobs were hard to get. New jobless claims rose in the latest government report. Still, employment expert John Challenger says his findings suggest that the nation's employers are not expecting a double-dip recession. He points to a big drop in the number of planned job cuts announced by employers over the past 6 months. Even so, other reports showed big drops in housing sales in May. That followed the end of a homebuyer's tax credit. Congress voted to extend the credit to the end of September, but only for people who signed a deal by April 30th. The House of Representatives passed a major bill to rewrite financial rules and add consumer protections. The bill provides a way for the government to close failing banks. President Obama had hoped to sign a final bill by July 4th, but the Senate delayed action on its version of the financial reform bill until Congress returned July 12th. And that's the VOA Special English Economics Report. You can comment on our reports on our website, voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The World Economic Forum is an independent organization. Its job is to help businesses, governments, and civil society groups find ways to work together to improve the world. The 21st World Economic Forum on East Asia recently took place in Thailand. Organizers wanted to bring attention to development in Southeast Asia. The event received extra attention because of the presence of Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, the Burmese opposition leader, and a newly elected member of Parliament. She traveled to Bangkok in her first foreign trip in over 20 years. Burmese President Thein Sein canceled his appearance at the meeting shortly after her travel plans were announced. Klaus Schwab started what came to be called the World Economic Forum and serves as its executive chairman. In opening comments, he praised the growing influence of Southeast Asian nations in the world economy and in political issues. In his words, "When you look at the ASEAN region, you feel that here you have a region which is full of dynamism. He said the region becomes more and more a crucial factor in the world economic and world political context. Several government leaders were in Bangkok for the meeting. They included the President of Indonesia, the Prime Minister of Vietnam, and the Prime Minister of Thailand. The forum is a place to discuss issues affecting the 10 members of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. In a speech, Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra noted threats like the debt crisis in Europe and climate change. But she also pointed to technological progress, democratic reforms, and new centers of economic growth as signs of hope. ASEAN nations are becoming increasingly important in the world economy. As a group, their economic activity is nearing $2 trillion. Southeast Asian economies are expected to grow more than 5% this year. That rate is higher than Europe or North America. World Trade Organization Director General Pascal Lamy also attended the meetings. He said Southeast Asia is doing better than other areas now, but he warned that a slowing world economy could create problems. He said he would expect the region to be more affected in the 2 or 3 years to come than it has been so far. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. Modern microfinance started with economist Muhammad Yunus. In the 1970s, he started what became the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh. He and the bank shared the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for the idea of offering small loans to the poor to fight poverty. In 2010, reports of harmful micro-lending methods and corruption shook the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. Mr. Yunus recently said in the New York Times that things got out of control. He noted that Andhra Pradesh had intensive lending activity at the time. We spoke to Giath Naqshbendi about changes in the world of microfinance. He is an expert in international business and teaches microfinance as a business model at the Kogod School of Business at American University. He says the government of India in certain states has started taking steps to guarantee that these institutions are operating under a strict system. Some experts have raised questions about whether micro-lending lifts women or poor families out of poverty. David Rudman is with the Center for Global Development, a research group in Washington. He says microloans do not do a good job fighting poverty. He says over $3 billion went into microcredit in 2010. But many lenders failed because of bad supervision or failure to repay loans. In one model, governments or non-governmental organizations give money to microcredit operations. Interest income is often used up by costs rather than helping other poor borrowers. But Giath Naqshbendi says that model is changing. Mr. Naqshbendi says sustainability is now a main goal. He says there has been a move in the last 5 or 6 years to find ways and means by which make these operations sustainable. In his words, sustainable means simply that, yes, we are going to rely on donations, but in the meantime, we are going to encourage these borrowers to save some of their money. Money from savings can then be used for new loans. Mr. Naqshbandi says private equity companies are looking closely at microfinance as an investment. New models are being developed to offer more than business loans. For example, educational loans and health insurance loans. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. For more business news for people learning English, go to voaspecialenglish.com.